When my son found out I had cancer, he threw me out because he didn't want to pay for my medicine. I wiped my tears, left the house, and did what they never expected. The clock on the doctor's wall ticked too loudly. It was one of those cheap plastic ones, plain white with red numbers, the kind you find in a school or a DMV. But that ticking sound, it suddenly felt like a countdown. To what, I didn't know. Or maybe I did. Walter, I'm afraid it's cancer. Stage 3. I didn't hear anything after that. Just the word cancer echoing in my ears. At 68 years old, I had learned to take most things in stride, creaky knees, a slower gait, blurry eyes. But this felt like betrayal by my own body. As I sat in my old pickup outside the clinic, I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead, engine running but car not moving. I thought of my son Jason. My only child. The boy I'd worked 2 jobs to raise. The boy I had sent to college with money I'd saved by skipping dinners and patching my shoes instead of buying new ones. I had imagined telling him about the diagnosis. I pictured him putting a hand on my shoulder and saying something like, "Don't worry, Dad. We'll get through this. I've got you." But what I got was something else. That night, when I told Jason, he stared at me for a long moment, then looked away like I was already gone. How bad is it? It's treatable, but it's going to be a long process. Chemo, medication, doctor visits. He didn't say anything right away. Then, and how much is all that going to cost? That's when something shifted. His voice didn't have worry, it had calculation. Budgeting. Cold, sterile math. I tried to smile to lighten the moment. I have a bit saved up. The pension might cover some. I just might need a little help, for the rest. His silence said it all. We were standing in his kitchen, the house I helped him buy. The granite countertops, the stainless steel fridge, even the down payment. That had been me. I'd signed over the last of my retirement fund to help him get settled. He had a good job, a growing family, a new life. And now here I was. Just a problem to solve. A number that didn't fit his spreadsheet. The next morning, a suitcase sat by the front door. I think it's best if you find a place where you can get support. I can't put this kind of pressure on my kids. It's not fair to them, Jason said, avoiding eye contact. I just looked at the suitcase, then at him. And still I didn't cry. Not yet. The cold air hit me as I stood outside the door, suitcase in hand. It was the same door I had walked through thousands of times, the same door I had come home to, greeted with laughter and warmth. But now it was just a door, a barrier between the home I had given everything to and the uncertain future that lay ahead. I walked away without looking back. The first night I slept in my truck. I parked in a quiet lot near a diner, far enough away that nobody would ask questions but close enough to find a bathroom if needed. I hadn't prepared for this. I thought I'd be met with sympathy, with care. But instead, it was like I was an inconvenience. Just a burden they didn't want to deal with. In the days that followed, I found temporary refuge in motels. Each night felt colder than the last, but it wasn't just the chill in the air that got to me. It was the emptiness. The deep, gnawing realization that I had given everything for this family, my health, my money, my time. And for what? To be tossed aside when I needed them most? I tried to reach out to Janet, my ex-wife and Jason's mother. Maybe she could help. Maybe she would understand, but she had remarried, had her own life. She'd moved on. So had everyone else. My calls went unanswered, and that only made the pain sharper. It wasn't just the cancer. It was the betrayal of it all. I couldn't afford my medications. The insurance wasn't enough to cover it all, and now I was left scrambling to figure out how to pay for chemo. It felt like a cruel joke. I had spent my life working hard, sacrificing everything to make sure my son had the best. And yet here I was, nothing more than a charity case. Days blurred into weeks and I kept the charade up, pretending I was fine when inside I was unraveling. But then came a strange shift. I started going to support groups for cancer patients. There, I met people who were in similar situations, some even worse. And in that room I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Dignity. It didn't matter that I had no home or money. I still had my will to live, my determination to push through. I was more than just a man waiting to die. I was a person who still had fight in him. But the world outside that room? That was a different story. Every time I reached out to Jason, it was like talking to a wall. No matter how hard I tried to explain that I wasn't asking for handouts, I was simply asking for the chance to survive, to fight, he made it clear that his priorities had shifted. And I was no longer a part of them. That's when I knew. I couldn't rely on anyone anymore. If I was going to make it through this, I had to do it on my own. I had to find my strength again. I spent my mornings in a small diner, sipping on cheap coffee and reading newspapers that had seen better days. The same regulars sat at the counter, each lost in their own thoughts. I tried not to get too comfortable. This place wasn't home and I didn't belong here. But it was the only place that felt like a temporary refuge, somewhere where I could disappear into the background and not be reminded of my failures. The cancer treatments drained me more than I had anticipated. The side effects were relentless, leaving me too weak to even leave the motel room some days. But there were moments, however brief, where I would catch a glimpse of something, a memory, a sense of purpose. I had been a fighter all my life. Nothing had come easy to me, but I always kept going. That hadn't changed. Not yet. One afternoon, while I sat at the diner, a woman approached me. She had to be in her mid-50s, her hair silver, but there was something about her smile, warm, genuine. I didn't recognize her, but she seemed to recognize me. She sat down across from me without asking. "You're Walter, aren't you?" I looked at her cautiously, unsure whether to respond. She seemed familiar, but I couldn't place her face. "I'm Claire. I used to work with your wife, Janet, years ago. I remember you. You always helped out in the community. You were always the one who stepped in when someone needed a hand." I didn't know what to say. For so long I had felt like no one cared. But here was someone who remembered me, remembered the man I used to be, the man who had given everything to others. The man who was more than just a forgotten cancer patient. We talked for a while about old memories, about life, about the hard things. I told her about what had happened with Jason, how I had been cast aside, and how I was trying to keep it all together. She listened quietly, without judgment, as though the weight of my words mattered. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was invisible. Claire ended up offering me something I didn't expect. A way out. She had a small house on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy, but it was hers. She was a widow, her children grown and living far away. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "You can stay with me for as long as you need. You won't be a burden." The words hit me harder than I expected. No one had said that to me in so long. I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to break down right there and thank her. But another part of me held back. Pride, maybe. Fear of taking help. I wasn't sure if I deserved it. "I don't want to be a burden," I said, my voice rough. "I've never asked for help before. I've always done it on my own." "You don't have to be strong all the time," she replied, her voice calm and reassuring. "You've given enough. Let someone give to you now." That was the moment I realized something. There were still good people in the world. I wasn't alone in this fight, not entirely. I had spent so many years believing that I had to carry everything by myself. But maybe it wasn't too late to accept help, to let others see me not just as the man who gives, but as someone who still deserved care. I didn't have much, but I had my pride and I had my life. I had to make a choice. And for the first time in a long time, I chose to accept the kindness of a stranger. Maybe that was the first step toward healing. A few days after I moved into Claire's house, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in months: peace. It wasn't perfect, not by any means. I was still battling the cancer, still unsure of what tomorrow might bring. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was just a burden. I was no longer the man who had been tossed aside like an old, broken appliance. Here I was simply Walter. A person who was worthy of care and kindness. Claire made it easy. She insisted I rest and take things slow. She cooked meals for me, kept the house quiet, and treated me with a respect I hadn't known in years. There was no talk of money, no hint of obligation. It was as if she understood that sometimes you just need a place to breathe. But still, my mind kept wandering back to Jason. How could I not? He was my son. I had given him everything, and yet, he couldn't give me even the smallest amount of compassion. I had made sure he went to the best schools, that he had a future better than mine. I worked myself into the ground to make sure he didn't go without. And now, when I needed him most, he couldn't even be bothered to offer a word of comfort. It ate at me. One evening after I finished my dinner, I made a decision. I was going to call Jason. I didn't know why. Maybe it was to get some closure, to hear him apologize, or maybe just to ask why he turned his back on me. Maybe I hoped, deep down, that he'd see the error of his ways. I picked up the phone and dialed his number, my fingers trembling slightly. It rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, Dad." His voice was distant, flat. Like he couldn't be bothered to put any emotion into it. "Jason, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm staying with someone right now. Claire, you remember her, right? She's been kind enough to take me in." He didn't respond right away. There was silence on the other end, and then, "Yeah, I remember her." Another long pause. "What's the point of all this, Dad? You're just gonna die. Why even bother trying to get treatment?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. His words hit me like a slap to the face. The man I had raised, the man I had loved, was speaking to me like I was disposable. Like my life meant nothing. "I'm doing this because I want to fight. I'm doing this because I deserve to fight. Not because of you, but for me," I said, my voice now trembling with emotion. "But more than that, I want you to understand that you hurt me. You turned your back on me when I needed you most." There was no response for a long time. It felt like hours, but it was only seconds. "I don't need your guilt, Dad. I have my own family to take care of." "You're on your own now," he finally said, cold and indifferent. "Goodbye." The line went dead. I sat there in silence, the phone still pressed against my ear. The tears that had been threatening to fall for so long now came hot and fast. I had given everything, and now it felt like I had nothing. No family. No support. Just an empty void where love should have been. But then something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to beg him for anything. I wasn't going to plead with him to see my worth. If Jason couldn't see it, then it was time to stop trying to make him. I wasn't his responsibility, nor was he mine. I wiped my tears, stood up, and looked out the window at the darkening sky. I had the strength to move forward. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The phone call with Jason lingered in my mind like a bad taste, but I couldn't let it consume me. The tears I shed that night were tears of release, not weakness. For too long, I had allowed my family to define my worth, to dictate how I felt about myself. It was time to take control of my own life again. I didn't want to be the old man who clung desperately to his past, begging for scraps of attention or affection from people who had long since forgotten what it meant to love. I had sacrificed too much for too long. That's when I realized something important. I had spent my whole life trying to prove myself to people who didn't care. Jason, my wife, even my own brother, I had given them everything. But they never saw me for who I truly was. They saw me as a tool, someone to be used, a provider to be drained until there was nothing left. But I wasn't just a paycheck. I wasn't a walking ATM. I was a person. A man who had dreams, emotions, and a life worth living. And so, with that in mind, I began to make the hard decisions. I called my lawyer and started the paperwork to make sure my assets, what little I had left after everything, were protected. I didn't have a lot of time left, but I sure as hell wasn't going to leave my life savings to people who never showed me a shred of respect. Over the next few days, I reached out to all of my children, including Jason, with one simple message. "I'm cutting all financial ties with you. If you need help, you're going to have to find it elsewhere. I've done enough for all of you." I didn't know if they would understand. I didn't care. I had been generous to the point of self-destruction, and it was time to stop enabling their indifference. They had taken so much from me, and now it was time for them to stand on their own 2 feet. The next morning I sat down and wrote out a letter. It was simple but from the heart. "Dear Jason, I have spent years giving you everything I could, and in return, you've shown me nothing but coldness and disdain. I understand that you have your own life, but I need to take care of myself now. You've taken all I had to give, and now it's time for me to focus on the time I have left. I will not allow you to take any more from me. It's time for me to live on my own terms. This is the end of my financial support. If you ever find yourself in need, remember that I won't be there to fix things for you. But I hope you find happiness and success, even if it's without me." The letter was painful to write, but also a relief. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about taking back my dignity. I wasn't going to let them continue to walk all over me just because they could. I had a right to live my final years with some sense of peace, and that meant cutting ties where I had to. The next day I sent out the letters. I waited, but the responses didn't come. Jason didn't call, nor did anyone else. In fact, the silence was deafening. And I felt free. Weeks passed, and I found myself settling into a routine that was unexpectedly peaceful. My days were no longer filled with the constant demands of my family, nor the guilt of not being able to keep up with their expectations. I had created a space where I could breathe, where I didn't have to live in the shadow of what I was supposed to be for everyone else. And as the days went on, I began to understand something profound about myself. There was a certain power in letting go. In the past, I had tied my worth to what I could provide. The more I gave, the more I felt loved. But that was an illusion. My family had never truly loved me for who I was. They loved what I could do for them, and when I no longer had the means to give, I was discarded. That was hard to swallow. But the harder pill to swallow was that I had allowed it to happen. I had allowed myself to be a servant to their needs, a figure in the background whose value was measured by the money in his bank account and the things I could buy. But now, as I sat on the porch in the late afternoon sun, a sense of clarity washed over me. I was more than just a provider. I had a history, a life full of moments that mattered, even if they were unseen by those who should have cared the most. I thought about Jason. About all the things I had done for him, the school fees, the help with his house, the countless gifts, and the sacrifices I made so he could live his dreams. I thought about my other children too. I had given everything, yet none of them could give me the one thing I truly needed: respect. It was a bitter truth to face, but it was one I had to confront if I was ever going to move forward. I had been too kind, too forgiving for too long. They had taken me for granted and I had let them. But no longer. I thought about the last thing Jason had said to me, that I should get out, because I couldn't afford my own medicine. That was the final straw. That was when I realized that no one, not my children, not anyone, had the right to treat me like that. So, I decided to let go completely. I wasn't going to chase after them. I wasn't going to beg for their love or their respect. The reality was harsh, but it was true. They weren't the family I thought they were, and I wasn't going to waste any more of my time or energy trying to change that. As I walked through the front yard of Claire's house, I felt a strange sense of pride. I wasn't defeated. I wasn't weak. I had finally done what I should have done years ago. I had taken control of my life. And I was at peace. In the quiet of the evening, I reflected on everything that had led me to this point. The pain, the betrayal, and the lessons learned. I had lived a life of sacrifice, but I would no longer allow that to define me. It wasn't about them. It was about me. And for the first time in a long time, I knew that I had done the right thing. I had given my all, and now it was time to give to myself. And in the end, that was the greatest gift I could have ever given, to myself. Sometimes in life, we are forced to make painful choices. We give and give, expecting love and gratitude in return, but often we find only disappointment. It's easy to fall into the trap of sacrificing everything for others, especially when you love them. But the truth is, if you don't learn to love yourself first, you'll end up with nothing left to give. You may face betrayal, heartache, and even loneliness. But in the end, the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. Don't let anyone, not even your own family, define your worth. Take back your power. Love yourself enough to walk away from what no longer serves you, even if it's painful. Because at the end of the day, you deserve peace. You deserve respect. And most of all, you deserve to be loved for who you are, not just for what you can give. So when life gets tough, remember this: it's never too late to reclaim your life. You are enough. You always have been.